Let's talk about psychoanalysis. This is the first session of an upcoming series which will be about the theme or motif of anxiety in terms of psychoanalysis and philosophy. This first session is meant as an elevator session, trying to get us a grip and a kind of an opening into psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic theory, and carving out some trajectories on where to follow and what we should be attentive to, what can be really beneficial to be attentive to, which traits and aspects, in order to get a first grasp and comprehension of the field of psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic theory. The title of this first session, which cannot be a full overview, but as I said, which can give us preliminary consideration and kind of do the groundwork for the later sessions in this series. The title is 50 Slides of PA. So basically, these are 50 slides of or about psychoanalysis, and we will go through them probably in several sessions, several smaller of these preliminary sessions. The subtitle, as you can read, is Why Psychoanalysis and Philosophy. There is a really delicate relationship between psychoanalysis and philosophy in which we go into a little bit. And this subtitle is alluding to a small book by theorist Alenka Zupancic, which is called Why Psychoanalysis. And this book is an absolute recommendation in terms of getting a first grip, a first grasp and comprehension of what psychoanalysis is about, what the fundamental notions or concepts of psychoanalysis are, why there is a certain necessity to the development of psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic theory, and why it was only possible at a certain moment or period in time or history to develop psychoanalysis, namely modernity. So she gives a great introduction to psychoanalysis and really carves out some of the most fundamental traits that are really important to be kept in mind when reading the primary sources of psychoanalytic theory. Which we will also do, going back to Freud and or starting with Freud, to say it like this. And for example, one such a trait is that psychoanalysis can be seen or is an occurrence precisely in between the natural sciences and philosophy. So it's a cropping up and expressing of a certain affair which happens between the natural sciences and philosophy. And what this means and why this is the case, we will go into this later in terms of these preliminary sessions. Okay, so as I said, we will go into the primary sources, but for this we have to do the groundwork. As Freud will say in terms of dreams, he calls it work on the dreams, Traumarbeit, and we will have to do the text work, but not only the text work, and this is also an important trait for psychoanalysis. It's not only about reading those texts, because there is a certain necessity to speak through and to speak it by oneself, but also always, of course, in relation to others, to speak through what psychoanalysis deals with. And this is not so easy, as we will see. And so we will go into primary sources, as I said. For this we have to do the groundwork, and we will start later then with the uncanny 1919 from Freud. We will also look into other texts and primary sources of other authors, like for example, as you see here, a picture of Jacques Lacan, a French theorist, psychoanalyst and philosopher, who really has a strong grasp of philosophy as well, and is kind of unfolding this delicate relation between psychoanalysis and philosophy. Okay, so of course Freud was also really well read, and he's an extraordinary author, at least in my opinion, and but he says at some point that he deliberately, intentionally, for example, he didn't read Nietzsche, and this is not because he thought it's not worth reading Nietzsche, but because and he says this explicitly, that he had the kind of the fear, if you want so, or the kind of suspicion that Nietzsche will anticipate fundamental traits and insights of psychoanalytic theory. And now you can say, okay, but this is not bad, right? So he would have some clues, also some perspective against which to measure his own considerations. Nevertheless, it's really important, or was really important for Freud to develop psychoanalytic theory radically against, or in terms of the cases he is dealing with. And this means, what this means, like on a grand level, we will talk about this later, but this means for having like a primary approach, or giving you a primary approach to this, what this means is that fundamental notions of psychoanalysis are really carved out in terms of the cases, and over the time he will have like a whole case history, right? He's going from case to case. They are all radically different, radically singular, and he will develop psychoanalytic theory in terms of its potential to analyze these cases and kind of further psychoanalytic theory and the praxis. And in this way, like we have to deal with kind of fundamental aspects of psychoanalysis. For example, the Oedipus complex. We don't have to buy in from the beginning fully into the Oedipus complex is kind of at the heart of like, let's say, psychoanalysis. But at some point, he's coming to a liminal situation, kind of a limit against which his considerations and his analysis is pushing, and where he kind of notices, and he also writes this, that he kind of gets at a border, at a kind of site of exception, and now he's kind of like heaving what might lie there, that there is a certain problem, and he will roll up his whole theory and then look like perhaps the theory was not right, perhaps we have to, the notions are too rigid, and then he will take in certain, let's say, concepts, ideas, or complexes like the Oedipus complex, but only in order and always with an eye to what is their capability in terms of interpretation work, of analysis, and does it prove to be like a necessary step in terms of theory development, so to say. Are these concepts under stress test, do they prove to be helpful? And so this is the way he develops psychoanalytic theory. Okay, so now there are several ways and starting points to go into psychoanalytic theory or psychoanalysis, and I choose one which is like contrasting psychoanalysis against another theoretical approach, which is called praxeology. And there are different variants of praxeology, or different approaches and theoretical considerations and deliberations that call themselves as a movement or as an approach praxeology. Perhaps you know Pierre Bourdieu, who develops praxeology in terms of a sociology, and but we will go into like just for getting a start, and as I said, for contrasting and differentiating what psychoanalysis is, into praxeology as it has its root in the Austrian school of economics, and namely there Ludwig van Mises wrote a book called Human Action. He wrote also other books, but this is kind of the fundamental work in terms of praxeology. And so, as the term praxeology states, this is the science of praxis. And of course, there is a certain conundrum to it, because, like, right there we talk about theory, praxis, scissor, and there's also a small book from Kant, which is über den Gemeinspruch, was in der Theorie richtig sein mag, aber für die Praxis nicht taugt. So what over the saying that it might be right in theory, but it isn't applicable in praxis. Okay, so theory of praxis has a certain problematic to it, right? Or raises a whole lot of questions. But nevertheless, we at some point, it will also be relevant for us. But here it's important that what praxeology basically is about is human action. Now, it's of course the question what action means in this regard, but it seems to offer a promising way of like entering into psychoanalysis as kind of contrastive conceptual vehicle. Okay, so with the so-called Austrian School of Economics and Ludwig von Mises especially, we can kind of witness an attempt to investigate into and do research concerned with the notion of value. And he's kind of looking at the history of economics. And basically, the Austrian school said what we can discover is that there's a considerable development with certain figures to the primate of mathematical modeling under the auspices of making value calculable. And regarding this development, which can also be interpreted as the seeking after of mechanisms that enable economists to find and predict prices and values in an economic system. So in order to make recommendation, decision-making processes for steering the economy towards economic stability or growth, right? And so this is based with, like, it's called the Keynesian revolution on mathematic modeling and mathematization. Now, the approach of praxeology and what gets called the subjective theory of value is to deal with human action. And it lays testimony of being engaged with value in a way different than to the well-known Keynesian revolution. And for value is getting then distinguished, intangible and actual value, stressing also the importance of the impossibility to entangle the context from a product. Okay, so, but this is just, as I said, a brief introduction to it. We won't delve any deeper, but praxeology is starting with an axiom. And this is kind of like their fundamental axiom. It's called the action axiom or the praxeological axiom. And it says that human acts. Human do act. This is what we do. And now, as I said, the question is what action mean? Now, it can mean, in terms of praxeology, that humans, us, we show a tendency, a preference of choice. So even if we don't do anything and just stay at our place and decide to do nothing, so deliberatively choose not to do something, not to act. So praxeology would say, well, right, but you show a certain tendency, perhaps not the way you conceive it yourself, but like for in a way of studying it, right, and kind of describing what you're doing there. It's you show a tendency, a preference of choice. Okay, and so this is how praxeology can say, this is what humans do. They act. And Ludwig von Mises says in one of his books, which is called Human Action, that praxeology is not at all about asking what drives humans to act or to behave in specific manners. And so herein, I hope to kind of carve out the difference between praxeology and psychoanalysis. So, and again, I will go a little deeper what the praxeological and action axiom says. So the action axiom is the basis of praxeology, as I try to carve out. It's really an axiomatic science, which starts from one axiom and then wants to do like an a priori science in terms of a praxeology, a theory, which will then be relevant for economic. And but not only for economic, but primarily or especially for economic. Now, a priori means that they will not take in or ground their theory on experience, but rather they will start with this praxeological axiom and work their way through in an abstract way. They will deduce further propositions from this first axiom and develop in this manner a science that is a part or comes before, let's say, experience, and then later you can kind of look and decide if this theory holds true to our experience. But nevertheless, it's the idea that right, our experiences and the way our economics works is already kind of really narrowed down into specific lanes, into a specific way of conduct. And this is also one of the reasons they want to start like from the axiom and really do a deductive approach to it. Now, Homo sapiens, the Homo agens, which Ludwig von Mises will call us, basically, purposely utilize means over a period of time in order to achieve desired ends. So action in this sense, or in this in praxeological terms, means purposeful behavior. So we do act, we show a tendency, a preference of choice, and we do this always in regard of a purpose, in means of achieving something. So in human action, Ludwig von Mises defined action in the sense of the action axiom by elucidating, and now I cite, human action is purposeful behavior. Or we may say, action is will put into operation and transformed into an agency, is aiming at ends and goals, is the ego's meaningful response to stimuli and to the conditions of its environment. It's is a person's conscious adjustment to the state of the universe that determines his life. Such paraphrases may clarify the definition given and prevent possible misinterpretations, but the definition itself is adequate and does not need complement of commentary. So this is how he really goes into his book Human Action. As I said, human action is defined by him as purposeful behavior, and he kind of starts from this premise and supposes that we do not need to complement a commentary for this definition. And so this is one approach, right? And which can be and was criticized a lot, and which has problems to it or raises questions, to say it more carefully. But right, so the differentiation now is that psychoanalysis deals exactly with what drives humans to act or to behave. So it also deals with action or behavior in specific manners, but it asks what drives humans to act like this, right? Because there are ways we are dealing or ways of dealing in our everyday life which cause us psychological stress, and in some situations or in some biographies and cases, an attainable level of suffering, right? So, and this is exactly the situation where patients or possible patients come to Freud and search the psychoanalytic treatment. They search the psychoanalytic situation, and they want to go into psychoanalysis. And of course, at the beginning, Freud was interested himself in cases, namely in a specific phenomena of a disease at the time, which was kind of classified as a disease, which is hysteria. And he does the development and starts the development of psychoanalytic theory, which is not yet called so at this point, with the phenomena of hysteria and with cases and persons kind of involved in this hysteria phenomenon at the time. And so PA is asking what drives human action and conduct in specific ways and manners, which can lead all the way down, as I said, to really the most unbearable psychological stress and untenable levels of suffering. It can lead to destructive, mutilating behavior. It can lead to harm and injure, right, to self-mutilation, but also to mutilation of others. And as I said, like the initiative to go into theory, and Freud says this clearly, that this is kind of, you could almost say, a condition that the patient has at least like a certain kind of feeling, a sort of notion of that something is wrong, and that that something has to be changed in one's life or in one's way of behaving, So this is kind of a really a fundamental condition, right? Because there can also be the case that kind of your social environment, like other persons, are forcing you, or even the state, forcing you into a psychoanalytic treatment. But Freud is really clear on this point that this is not, this cannot be successful in a way. Okay, so PA is situated or situating itself as a manner of discourse precisely between philosophy and the natural science. And it's not only that this is what we will kind of uncover, hopefully, and kind of carve out, that psychoanalysis, it's not only that Freud is saying, okay, this is a science that takes some stuff from natural sciences and some stuff from, let's say, human sciences and philosophy, and therefore it's kind of in between. No, it's more of an occurrence. Something is working itself through and comes to the fore, but in a kind of disguised manner, and it's always that there is. It seems to be a third figure or a third kind of element. A third moment, to say it more precise, but then it will show that this third moment is not a third element. So to correct myself, it's not that there are like say the natural sciences and human sciences, philosophy, and then there is like a third science. No, like kind of that they are all on an equal level, but it's rather more complex and more strange. That kind of there is this third figure, but it neither is a third in the sense of a third element, and it's not reducible to one of the two others. So this is really a fundamental trait that we can follow in psychoanalytic theory. Okay, so now, and this is why I wrote here, psychoanalysis is drilling or trenching at the liminal border. It's even a way of deconstructing at this threshold, at this liminal point, or in this liminal space, precisely in this in-betweenness. Since it is a discipline or discourse from the beginning, or the initiation, which has no clear-cut scope of objects. So in German it's called Gegenstandsbereich. So normally, right, for the natural sciences or ordinary, they have an ordered set of rules which can be applied from of different persons, positions, perspectives, but it's always the same set of rules. Of course, they change over times, and even a whole science can change their fundamental notions, as happens in physics with Einstein. But the kind of the scope of objects that they study, like physics, for example, objects in the world, how they relate, and how they move, and what activates or what drives their movement, how this is functioning, right? So today, perhaps also with particles and quantum states and quantum. There it gets far more complicated. But quantum particles, let's say, like this, if this is a notion, like right. So they basically have at least a scope of objects. Now in the realm of physics, it's getting more complicated, as I already discovered myself now saying this. So, but basically this is kind of the starting point or the premise where science can start, where science can start. Now with psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic theory, there's kind of a structural problem, because it doesn't have a clear-cut scope of objects. It doesn't have, in this sense, an object. Its object is the unconscious, but we will see it's not an object. And so it raises the question, or kind of knocks at the problem, and kind of shakes this problem space open. What are suitable objects of a scientific study? And and this is, we take this at this point as a structural problem that kind of poses itself through the structure and systematicity of general conceivable sciences. And because, as I said, the object, the unconscious, isn't graspable in the ordinary sense of object. So it's not strictly delineated or contoured. Rather, it's part of a process. It's itself a process, an unfolding of specific turnings and dynamics. And right, so and this is crucial because it's kind of my own experience that this is a key. When we hear the unconscious, I mean, what does this mean? And this is like a question we have to follow, because it's not easily answerable, right? If it's unconscious, it cannot be there cannot be like a knowledge of it, right? In the ordinary sense, there can be no knowledge of it. And now, one way of kind of approaching it is to say that this voice that is speaking, the voice that is speaking, also in terms of science and ordinary everyday life, this voice doesn't know about it. It doesn't know about it. It cannot know it. So this voice is speaking and is working itself through what we also do here, like what Freud calls in relation to the dreams, dream work, Traumarbeit. And we also do this in terms of text work, but it's not so. And this is one trait of the unconscious, right? It cannot be fixed and captured in texts. This is also something that we will have to discuss in terms of writing. And now it cannot be grasped in texts. Nevertheless, it can show up and not show up in any ordinary sense. That's why we should take this word "show up" in kind of quotation marks with a certain carefulness, because it's showing up as interruption, as absence, as like a gap, for example, and so it cannot be heaved into knowledge. So let's go with this approach. It's something about this voice doesn't know, but which nevertheless has effects and kind of temporalizes effects, or kind of effectuates certain gaps, fissures, and ways of being presence by being absent, for example. And so we have to really unpack these terms and kind of try to articulate them by ourselves as the unconscious, because otherwise they just stand in there. And what additionally makes it hard and problematic to approach psychoanalytic theory and psychoanalysis is that we got these kind of these image introjected, like where there's the iceberg, and then you have like the small thing dipping out of the water, which is the eye, and then the big part, right, the big trunk, so to say, or big corpus of the iceberg beneath the water is then the it. But it's not particularly an helpful image. And this way of representational thinking. So right, if we read the unconscious or the it, then an image will pop, maybe, or it might be that an image pops up in you, so to say, and appears in front of you, like in terms of your inner eye, let's say it like this. And but this makes it not easier, because so what the unconscious and the it is about cannot be reduced and cannot be brought into an image. This is also one particularity, because not only is writing something we have to look in, but also the image. But because psychoanalysis is dealing with that which is not in the image, but nevertheless kind of has effects and effectuates, influences the image in specific manners that are not themselves in the image, okay? And the unconscious, the drive, the it, these are all describing affairs which cannot be brought into a coherent image. This is really important. They are figures that are broken in themselves and that are breaking themselves. They are never coming into coherent unity or into a coherent, unified image. They cannot be, by definition. Okay, so also to shortly approach the ids. The ids, you may imagine the id as something, or perhaps as some, aggressive part in us that is working itself out in terms of drives that are sheer like animality, or have this sheer trait of animality to them, and the unconscious perhaps as something that is thinking in you, but you are not aware of it, that is kind of on a double floor or beneath a double floor, and where there are like thoughts going on that you are not aware of. So this is also not a particularly helpful way, in my estimation, to approach psychoanalysis. So rather, let's take the id like this. The id differentiates itself from the I or the ego and the superego, and this in a dynamic manner, as Freud also says. Freud says they have to be understood topically. So in terms of a certain way of spatial understanding. So there are these topological figures, which are basically a figure that is kind of shifted in itself and kind of twisted, but it's from everything is on one plane. There's no double floor. Nevertheless, it's like can be a super complex figure twisted in itself. Okay, and so the I, the id, and the superego, they are. This is Freud's second topology after or before his topology was pre-conscious, conscious, and unconscious, and there were certain limits to this kind of topology, or he had kind of insights and learnings from psychoanalytic practice and his case studies, which made him change this topology. Now, these topological regions, they are all on a psychic territory, and they are ways of condensation or compression, in a sense, and there are certain dynamic traits to these regions that make them kind of to a topological figure, right? And so the id, the speciality or the fundamental trait of the id is that it doesn't have an organization. It's not governed by organization. Whereas the I and the I function is organization. The I is governed by organization. Organization governs the I. Right. So what we call I, and what we mean also in psychoanalysis with I, is a kind of organization and a form of structure. There's a form of structure to it, a coherence, and a making coherent. Always this verbal, processual, temporal aspect to it. And so the id is exactly kind of housing these parts that cannot be brought into this organization or into a organizational structure, and that cannot fall, or that they kind of avoid and kind of resist the government by the organization and by the I function. And okay, so this is what I try here is to really speak through these terms and not only take them and kind of be how do you say, kind of be disappointed later when I cannot grasp something with it, because this is kind of this was my problem going into psychoanalytic theory. Okay, so the problematic is the realm or field of psychoanalysis, and also the notions of psychoanalysis. Since we have to develop them, we have to unpack them, speak them through, and also understand them by going into the cases and the kind of the documentation of the cases that are handed over by Freud. And Okay, so since psychoanalysis is concerned with unconscious images, imagos, representations, Vorstellungen, thoughts, and strivings and steerings, so what Freud calls Regungen, and that this definition of what psychoanalysis is studying what psychoanalysis is studying and thus must work differently. So this is kind of the uptake, or what we can take up from this first slide. There's a certain detent or even suspension at work concerning the relation of cause and effect also. So this means that right, so patients are searching the psychoanalytic situation, psychoanalytic treatment, and they have kind of symptomatic behaviors. They show, now we have again, they show symptoms. We have kind of the uptake from, or kind of the parallel to praxeology in terms of they show a tendency, they show a symptom. And this symptom, it's not that it's clearly, it's like definitely, unambiguously can be defined where the symptoms begin and where it ends. It rather is a kind of a bundle of traits, behaviors, kind of perhaps also attitudes or ways of conduct that show themselves or give themselves as being harmful to the person, but it has to be always kept in mind that according to Freud, everyone is symptomatic. It's not that there are normal persons who don't have symptoms. So everyone has a neurosis, and everyone shows symptoms. But so basically, you can live with your symptoms or with your symptom. Nevertheless, it can also be that there's a certain asymmetry to it, as I said before, that leads to a kind of an untenable suffering, where you are not able to deal with your symptom anymore, and then it becomes a way characterized as trait of illness, a trait of disease. In that specific sense, that you cannot live with your symptom in this particular moment over perhaps a time period, right? And okay, now these symptoms, and this is crucial for psychoanalysis as well, they are not traced back to or cannot be traced back, this is what psychoanalysis discovered, to a single cause. There is a multiplicity of singular events and occurrences, and a whole context in which the symptom worked its way through. And so this is how, or this is why there's a certain detent or even suspension of the classical relation of cause and effect, so that there is, right, in physics we have like there's a cause to a movement, and then we have the movement as such. But the movement always, everything needs to have a cause to kind of bring it onto this formula. So the classical natural scientific causal relation, A causes B. And PA rather moves from case to case. And it's neither a traditional empirical conduct of a scientific study with the necessity of the sentence of cause, or the law of cause, nor is it anti-scientific. So there must be something that is connecting, or that is kind of there must be a thread that is kind of binding all these cases and making them a case history, right? And but there is a difference. So this is really crucial as well, that psychoanalytic theory makes some generalizations, but it's not starting with a a general statement or a general supposition. Rather, it's starting with radical singular cases, and then it's developing kind of overarching themes, motifs, and also like ways of analyzing and interpreting what is going on, right? This is then psychoanalytic theory, but it doesn't have this kind of aspiration to state like universal laws, universal propositions. So it's in fact the only discourse that that can do away with the transcendental signifier, which was basically God, like either the god of religion or the god of philosophy, like a kind of how do you say, a kind of safeguard that your discourse is unified, and kind of a closing of your discourse in terms or in order to make general universal statements. And psychoanalytic discourse, this is also something we will go into with Jacques Lacan, is the only discourse, Lacan says, like at least according to Lacan, that can do away with the God hypothesis. With the hypothesis, as Jacques Derrida will call this, the transcendental signifier. And transcendental here is borrowed from Kant, like the condition of possibility for like a unified discourse, or a unified sense, a coherent sense, a coherent field of sense. So psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic theory will be able to do away with this. And it's not that we have to buy in, but this is kind of radicalization of what is going on in philosophy in the 20th century. Okay, so second slide. Now this was a bit long on the first one, but these are really important aspects to it to really get a grip on what psychoanalytic theory will be about. It will also help us to read the primary sources, because we will know we will have a feeling and a kind of not only a feeling, but we will have certain themes and motifs and aspects that show themselves really to be like red spoons that going all along psychoanalytic texts and theory development. Okay, psychoanalysis is analyzing the psychical territory or structurality, which consists of a multiplicity of relations and doesn't get along well with typical generalistic approaches or attempts of definition. This is what I tried to outline. Now, a space is ripped open for a discursive field between the natural sciences and philosophy, which makes up actual reality and through which we can understand the things surrounding us, ourselves, and the structure of actual real reality. Now, this sounds rather cryptic and naive with the kind of insistence of actual reality. In German, it's Wirklichkeit, an actual real reality. I kind of doubled this notion, and brought them together. But what this kind of, we will later see why this is like kind of a exciting development, but also like a strange one. That what is happening there? Why is psychoanalysis an occasioning? Why is it kind of an eventual ripping open, and that is also parasitical on other discourses? And what is expressing itself? This is a big question. What is expressing itself? Because psychoanalysis, and this is also the point of Alenka Zupancic, is only possible in modernity since it kind of expressing what is repressed by modernity. So to give you kind of an anticipation of what may be an answer to this question, a preliminary one. So